Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn series today on the Fauna Sensitive Design Guidelines in practice. Before we get started, I'll just give everyone a couple minutes to get into the room and kick off with a couple of introductions. Hi, my name is Lily Rose. I'm a Senior Industry Advisor with ecologiQ, and I'm joined here today with my colleague Doi. Doi, would you like to say hello?
Hi all, Doyley, Industry Manager. I'm here today with Lee Rose at today's Lunch and Learn. Really looking forward to today's event.
Thanks so much, Doi. Great, we will get started. So, before kicking off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay my respects to elders past and present and the elders of other Aboriginal communities who may be here today. Whenever we're having discussions about sustainability and circularity, I always think it's really important to acknowledge that Aboriginal and First Nations people have been caring for country for over 60,000 years. I myself am dialing in from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And if you're similarly located today, you may have noticed some more misty mornings and cold, rainy days. And that is because we have entered into the season of wearing or wombat season. So you may see wombats out and about during the day seeking sunshine. So a very topical time to be having some discussions about fauna sensitive design today. If you haven't encountered ecologiQ before, I'll just do a very quick introduction. Myself and Doi, we work for the Victorian State Government for the ecologiQ program, and that's essentially a Victorian government initiative to optimise the use of recycled and reused materials in Victoria's major infrastructure projects, and essentially contribute to a more circular economy in Victoria. So the policy was introduced in 2020, so it's been around for about 6 years. And it essentially boils down to two different aspects to support the uptake of it, which is the optimization of the use of recycled materials and also reporting on the materials and volumes used. So, in about its 6 years of being around, we have seen about 7.2 million tonnes of recycled and reused materials used across our entire project portfolio, which, if you're an avid fan of cricket or AFL, that's enough to fill approximately 3 mcgs. So, some pretty staggering volumes when you put it into that perspective. It is now my pleasure to present to you our presenters for today. Austin O'Malley, the Senior Manager of Ecology at VIDA Roads, and Helen Vickers, the Ecology Manager also at VIDA Roads. So I'll hand over to you, but before I do, please just remember that we have a Q&A function in Zoom to ask questions. So if you've got any burning questions that pop up as we go along, please feel free to pop them in the chat there, and we will get to them at the end. So without further ado, I will hand over to Austin. Thank you, Austin.
Great, thanks, Lily. So I'll be talking about the Fauna Sensitive Road Design guideline that VIDA Roads has developed and some supporting resources. So just for some background information in terms of where the organisational background. VIDA Roads is an agency within the Victorian Infrastructure Delivery Authority, or VIDA, delivers Victoria's Big Build program. VIDA Roads is tasked with developing and delivering major road projects across Victoria. Projects which are ultimately handed back to the Department of Transport for ongoing maintenance. And we have a diverse portfolio across Victoria in urban and rural landscapes. So roads, though, our natural environment is a key consideration in the planning and delivery of our road projects, including wildlife populations and threatened fauna species. Roads, however, can have a negative impact on these wildlife populations. That includes through factors such as habitat loss, disturbance, both indirect and direct, such as light, noise, pollution that can alter habitat quality, but also, as well, importantly, connectivity loss and the barrier effect of that roads can create for wildlife. Importantly, as well, is wildlife injury and mortality that's caused through collisions with vehicles. This is a key consideration because collisions with vehicles have been increasing year on year with Victoria. And there's both impacts on wildlife, but also as well, there's human safety considerations as well as consequences for our threatened species. This is an issue that's been recently subject to a parliamentary inquiry in Victoria, and which has made a number of recommendations related to wildlife mitigation on roads, but also as well one key recommendation around fauna sensitive road design guidance. So one of the key recommendations so one proposed design solution is designing and constructing roads in a way that reduces their impacts on wildlife, referred to as FRCD. So that's a process where roads are designed to avoid, minimise and manage impacts with an aim to facilitate wildlife movement, but also as well to prevent that wildlife mortality. This is where technical guidance can assist. It's not new field internationally, but there's been limited locally relevant guidance available, particularly in a form that can be understood by designers and engineers. This leads to uncertainty of design requirements and what we need to build on our road projects. So consequently, we have developed several new resources, including FRCD Guideline. This is technical guidance for both our ecologists, engineers and other professionals on how to successfully plan, deliver and FRCD on our road projects. Specifically, these resources included the centerpiece, which is the FRCD Guideline, but also as well the FRCD visuals, which are interactive virtual renders of wildlife crossing structures. Internally as well, we've developed an FRCD cost estimator, which estimates the cost of various different FRCD measures, including wildlife ecologists. So the broad aim of these guidance was to develop that explicit technical advice to support all our teams and our delivery partners in how to successfully plan and design and deliver FRCD on our road projects. However, this guideline covers a wide range of topics, including, sorry, I'm having trouble going between slides here, including a number of topics around the goals and background of FRCD implementation, the environmental evaluations that underlie those and inform the FRCD measures. But overall, one of the key areas that the FRCD guideline focuses is on wildlife crossings. So the FRCD covers most of the major types of crossing structures across Australia that accommodates a number of different fauna groups. So we've got terrestrial fauna culverts that accommodate connectivity for koalas and bandicoots and a number from large to small native animals. We also have mixed use culverts that are addressed they can accommodate both aquatic and terrestrial use. We also have larger structures such as bridge underpasses and land bridges, as well as more bespoke specific crossing structures such as glider poles and canopy bridges for our arboreal fauna. So the main aim of all these crossing structures is to safely guide our fauna across our roads. And this is nearly always a combination of both barrier fencing along the roadway that keeps wildlife off our roads and guides them safely through a crossing structure. We also have canopy bridges and glider poles, which also facilitate connectivity for marsupial gliders. And this is an example from one of our projects in the Chukaimama Bridge for crest glider and sugar gliders, and also as well Yanyin road project to our left. We also have glider poles which facilitate connectivity for our gliders, which can traverse over 30 metres across roadways. So those are effectively poles where the gliders can glide from one to the other across the roadway. Another major type of wildlife crossing, as I noted, was culverts and elevated roadways. So they provide connectivity for a wide range of fauna species, particularly ones that are ground dwelling, but also as well water birds and other aquatic fauna which occur along waterways. Finally, we've got some larger structures which are covered by FSRD guideline, including land bridges. So this is an example from Compton Road in Brisbane. These structures facilitate connectivity for a very wide range of fauna species. And you can see there's also integrated rope bridges and rope ladders that provide connectivity for arboreal fauna. As I noted, fencing is a really key component of integrated design that facilitates facilitates connectivity, but also keeps animals safely off our roadways. An example here is from our Hillsville Courier project, which we'll talk about a bit further, that was designed particularly for bandicoots, to keep bandicoots off our roads and funnel them through wildlife crossing structures. Fauna furniture is also a key component of our crossing structures. So those are usually designed in particular reference to the wildlife behaviour and its movement behaviour to ensure that animals can effectively utilise those structures, but also as well they're safe when they do so. And there's some examples there of shelters for bandicoots and other pipe structures within our culverts, as well as recognising the form of mobility that the wildlife has. So there may be rails that are integrated with culverts for koalas, but also as well ledges for bandicoots and other arboreal animals. Another important feature which the FSRD guideline covers is mitigating the effects of light, with the first primary method of avoiding minimising lighting where required, and particularly where integrated with wildlife crossings, because that can have a negative effect on wildlife use. Another measure is the spectrum of light, focused on warm light and avoiding blue light spectrum for our wildlife, as well as directional shielded lighting, which can reduce the spread of light within adjacent habitats. Time-activated and present-activated lighting is also being increasingly used globally, and that is really focused towards having lights turn off during those periods where wildlife are active, but also on during those key times in which people are using and pedestrians are using our roadways. So also as well, but FRCD can be very challenging to implement in practice, as this ecological mitigation is complex, it's species specific and context dependent. As I noted, there's limited technical guidance available to the level where you can have this information easily flow into a designs for projects. So often there's uncertainty about design requirements. So there's also as well the communication of some of these principles and information between various different disciplines, between ecologists, engineers, to project managers, and along to our contractors. And it's really key that the objectives and what we're trying to achieve with the wildlife crossings and other FSRD elements is understood across those range of disciplines. Time is also constrained on road projects, so we need to have this information very early in the process. We also need to consider the on-ground conditions as well. So designs will change through time, and we need our designs to be able to adapt with those through the development process. So it's really important we have that technical information, but also as well the objectives we're trying to achieve with those designs. So this is where the FRCD guideline comes into place. So we have specific design guidance for each different type of wildlife crossing structure and different major forms of FRCD elements such as fencing. For each one of these, we have the target and fauna group, species identified, the design dimension and material required to deliver that structure, any requirements for inundation, dry passage or landscaping and habitat improvement, but also importantly that fauna fencing and fauna furniture. And finally, lighting and noise requirements and any monitoring requirements to manage that wildlife crossing structure in the long term. So importantly, communication is a key element of the guideline. And the guideline attempts to communicate this information in different formats to ensure that it's accessible to a range of audiences. So we've incorporated annotated diagrams as part of the FSRD guideline and visualizations that are incorporated within the document and also as well within the interactive web, which I'll speak to in a moment. But look, these are design guidance, and certainly 2D design guidance have real limitations. So we've developed an interactive web app called FRCD Visuals to communicate this specification and guidance contained within the FRCD guideline. It covers all the major types of crossing structures, which are covered within the guideline. They have annotations for each crossing structure, and they communicate the ecological objectives, concepts, and specifications with the guideline. As a note, you can see going through, we've got bridge, underpass, terrestrial culvert, amphibian culverts coming up here. So they're intended to support the FRCD guideline, some of the design concepts and requirements, but also as well communicate the ecological objectives that we're trying to achieve, and importantly address those limitations of 2D design drawings and as a communication aid between disciplines. I'll just quickly run now a video, just running through just an example of some of the crossing structures. Oh, apologies. So these tools are really important for ensuring that when we're developing these crossing structures, FFCD elements, that there's a really good understanding of what we're trying to achieve with them, and they can then be incorporated into design. So effectively, they're translating that ecological knowledge into engineering design drawings, providing that detailed specification to our projects, but also as well, they enable multidisciplinary collaboration between our teams. It provides clear communication of concepts and early planning and feasibility assessments of these crossing structures and enable continuous improvement. Finally, the FRCD covers a number of other major mitigation forms, including noise, deterrence that keep wildlife off-road, but also as well wildlife signage and emerging new technologies such as animal detection systems. It also covers revegetation landscape and habitat restoration. That's really important in providing that habitat to guide animals through wildlife crossings, but also as well material reuse opportunities and a timber reuse program which we run internally. Some principles for implementing FRCD are incorporated into a recommended process in the guideline, and some key principles which are embedded within the process, including the importance of early planning and feasibility of FRCD elements, the ecological assessments that need to go into early planning and assessment of our FRCD measures, multidisciplinary collaboration, as I've mentioned multiple times, but also as well action across each one of the delivery phases, ensuring that ecological advice is incorporated at each stage of the delivery program, but also as well the continuous improvement that's part of capturing those the outcomes of those processes. I'll now pass to my colleague Helen Vickers, who will give a couple of case studies of FRCD in action on our projects. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Austin. Okie dokie. So I'll just share my slides. Terrific. Okay, so I've got two case studies for you today. The first is in Healesville. This is in the Pakenham area of Victoria, if you're familiar with it, and the project involved a 10-kilometre duplication of an existing road, in addition to building some bridges and roundabouts. And the project was delivered a couple of years ago now by what was MRPV, which is now VIDA. The project required an EPBC approval for impacts to both southern brown bandicoot, which is the species on the top right, and growling grass frog, and both of these are nationally threatened species. So in turn with this approval, we also were required to develop a fauna management plan, which is a fairly standard thing, but this one was required to detail design standards for fauna infrastructure, including culverts, bridges and ponds. And as part of the approvals process, we were also required to monitor the implementation of those those structures over a 10-year period. So as Austin mentioned, within the Fauna Sensitive Road Design Guidelines, there are some combined underpasses or multi-cell culverts. There's a few different names for them. And we needed one of these to accommodate both southern brown bandicoots and growling grass frogs. The image shows areas of the structure that were dedicated for wet and dry passage. So here you can see where the growling grass frogs might head through onto the wet side, and over here on the right and again on the left where dry passage was created for southern brown bandicoots. They don't like getting wet feet, apparently. In addition, we included gabion walls, which are indicated here in this illustration, and this is for amphibian shelter. So you can imagine a frog might want to hide in between some rocks, and it's also helpful for slowing down water flow if necessary. Over on the right-hand side, you can see ledges that were installed. And these are added to dry culverts as alternative crossings, particularly for periods of high flow or flooding. And that was really important in the Hills of Koorarup context because the road is built on a very large historic swamp, and so it's pretty wet. So in keeping with that, one of the challenges we had with this project was that in order to implement the structures successfully, i.e. have a part that's meant to be dry, we needed to have a good understanding of hydrology modelling, and that obviously needed to happen prior to design of the structures to ensure that dry passage could be achieved. So here you can see them in action. We delivered them, which is terrific. So the road isn't open at this point. These are still sort of under construction in these photos. So as Austin mentioned, fauna fencing is absolutely critical to preventing roadkill. So while the structures themselves support connectivity in the landscape, it's really the fauna fencing that prevents roadkill. The mesh that goes on the fauna fencing isn't shown in this picture, but I assure you it is there these days. And so at each of the structures, we included up to 100 metres of fauna fencing on either side, including across the structure as well. You can also see in this image the different areas that were set aside for dry and wet passage. So dry here on the left, and again there's another one over here, and the wet culverts through the centre. And some additional components that were added to support usage, such as bandicoot shelters. That's this little structure here. The men's shed got involved in building some of those, and they were put in place until the vegetation had really begun to establish to provide some cover for bandicoots. There's also permanent fauna furniture, which is shown here, which Austin talked about earlier, and landscaping, which is a critical component if you want your structures to be used. In the image up here on the top right, you can see some light wells, and these have been installed in the central median of these culverts because the culverts are quite long. And ideally, you want to improve the microclimate within the culvert. So these light wells help improve airflow and light and encourage usage of the culverts. Down here on the bottom right, you can see what it looks like if you're a bandicoot inside one of these dry culverts. So here we have a ledge on the left-hand side, some natural substrate across the floor, and here is some fauna furniture. Now, this was designed specifically with bandicoots in mind and considering predators in the local area. So bandicoots can shelter inside these terracotta pipes, I suppose you could call them, but foxes can't get through. So foxes are one of the foxes and cats, one of the primary predators in this location. And here we have evidence of bandicoots using the structures. We have quite a few photos of them within the culverts, but it seems that they're only using some of the structures and not others. So we're really keen to find out why that might be. A second component of the Hills of Koorarup project were frog ponds. So this image shows three of the 6 ponds that we developed for growling grass frogs. And again, at each structure, we installed fauna fencing, which was suitable for frogs at these locations. So that's a slightly different design to elsewhere. Across the project, we installed over 1 kilometre of fauna fencing, which is quite a bit. And the ponds were designed in keeping with the growling grass frog standards, which are relevant in Victoria. And they included appropriate landscaping and connectivity measures and opportunities for basking. So here on the top right, you can see the image. We've got fauna fencing that wraps all the way around, and it goes all the way around over here. This is an example of one of the wet culverts. There's no dry option for this one, and it flows through to another pond on the other side. There is significant landscaping on the projects. And down here, this is a pond that shows some of the basking opportunities for growlers, which is quite important for other frogs too, of course.
But this pond has actually been drained after it had been planted out because we'd found that the submergent vegetation cover wasn't sufficient. So that was all replanted. So that's an important component of growlers as well, growler ponds. And best of all, again, in recent surveys, we found evidence of growling grass frogs using our ponds, which is really terrific and quite heartwarming. The second case study I have for you today is, it focuses on the Echuca-Moama Bridge project. So if you don't know where Echuca is, it's up on the Murray and it crosses over the Murray, obviously crosses between Victoria and New South Wales. So this project delivered the second crossing of the Murray River. Apparently they've been waiting 140 years for a second bridge, so I think they were quite thankful it got built. The surrounding landscape, which you can just kind of see in the background here, is home to many threatened species and communities, such as squirrel gliders, which is this little cutie on the right, and the Victorian temperate woodland bird community. So as part of the approval conditions for the project, we were required to install 2 canopy bridges, and that was to facilitate connectivity for squirrel gliders and other arboreal species. And we needed to monitor and evaluate the use of those bridges. We were also required to install 1 replacement hollow for every hollow-bearing tree that was removed. And unfortunately, that was 316 hollow-bearing trees. And as part of that approval condition, again, we needed to monitor the use of the replacement hollows. And we were targeting 50% usage by native species of those hollows. So we partnered with WSP and we designed 2 canopy bridge structures, 1 below the road, which you can see here, and 1 above the road. Now, the below road bridge, as far as we know, it's the only one in Victoria and possibly within Australia, but I'm happy to stand corrected if there are others out there. And these bridges were monitored using remote cameras. So we had one on each side of the bridge, probably easier to show you on this one. There's one here and then one here, so we could determine if a full crossing was made. And these cameras were installed and monitored from mid-2022 to December 2024, and they captured somewhere between 21,000 and 92,000 images per camera. So I think AI had a bit to play in sorting through some of that imagery, unless it was a poor graduate. It turns out the bridges are pretty popular with lots of different species, and almost immediately so. This also included our target species, which is the squirrel glider, this one up here on the left. So we've got some statistics on the bridges, and we recorded 601 detections of squirrel glider at the above road bridge and 874 at the below road bridge. So they use the bridges fairly similarly. Crest glider, which is this one down here, looking a bit worried about passing the tawny frogmouth. We detected 703 of those at the above road bridge, but 4,295 at the below road bridge, which is quite a substantial difference. I should note that the below and above road bridges weren't in exactly the same location, so there is potential that surrounding landscape has influenced those results. But as I understand, I think WSP are looking into that a bit further. Something else to note for both crossing structures on Healesville and at Echuca is that we haven't found any evidence of predation, which is a really common misconception with fauna crossings. A fox doesn't sit on one side of the rope bridge or the culvert just waiting for dinner to jump into its mouth. So we do studies on predators as well, and there hasn't been any evidence of increased predation as a result of these structures. The second component of the Echuca-Moama project was the use of replacement hollows. So again, we partnered with WSP and decided to investigate 3 different types of replacement hollows and compared them with natural hollows. So we had 158 of each type of hollow as part of the project. So here you can see on the left, salvaged hollows. So these hollows are existing hollows that come from trees that have been cut down. A cap has been put on the top and the bottom, and then they've been attached to an appropriate tree. Carved hollows is where it is as it sounds. A hollow is carved directly into a tree, and then they put a little door on the front to fill in the gap. And obviously the size of the hollows have been tailored to the species that we were targeting, and a nest box, which you're probably all quite familiar with. So these hollows were assessed yearly from 2020 to 2024. And as I said, we had a target usage of 50% of replacement hollows were to be used or show use by native fauna by the end of year 3. In terms of the results, we found that replacement hollows are also pretty popular with local species. 80% of all replacement hollows showed use. And a further breakdown of that, we found 78% of carved hollows showed usage, 82% of salvaged log hollows showed usage, and 96% of nest boxes showed usage. And interestingly, we only found that 40% of natural hollows showed usage, but that should be caveated with the fact that natural hollows are obviously not a standard size, and it can be quite tricky to sort of get the cameras down and into the sort of depths of some of those hollows. So that should be taken with a note of caution. But a wide variety of species used the hollows. So we had a whole suite of different bird species. We had a number of different gliders. Up here, you can just make out there's a squirrel glider hanging out in its tray. We also had lace monitors, use some of them. I'm not quite sure how they fitted into the hollows because they are quite large. Microbats, possums, termites, wasps, bees, and spiders. So yeah, a lovely suite of species. And we're continuing to do some research on these hollows moving forward with a PhD student who's taken on the reins. Over to you, Austin.
Thanks, Helen. Just to sum up, the FRCD guideline and supporting resources, it's intended to be a central reference for best practice FRCD to support our VIDA roads and delivery partners in designing delivering roads. It defines technical design requirements for projects that is informed by the ecological information that feeds into those designs. It supports effective communication between disciplines as well as that multidisciplinary collaboration, and will support early phase implementation and consideration of these features in our road projects, as well as being a resource for the broader industry. And and we will, hopefully learn more through case studies like Helen has presented, and those will feed into further development of these technical resources going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Austin and Helen. What an amazing presentation. I just love those pictures of the fauna using the rope bridges so much. Such excellent work done on the guidelines. Truly, it's a huge piece of work, and it's been amazing to hear about the outcomes that it's had on our project. So thank you so much for your time. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, which I will go over now. So the first one from Bridget. Do you ever get pushback from the community about the aesthetics of the various fauna crossings? And do you do much community engagement education about the infrastructure?
Austin, I'm not sure if you want to take this one.
Yeah, I can jump in. It's a very good question. I haven't actually had that. I haven't heard of anyone objecting to wildlife structures. Often as well, sometimes like a lot of our wildlife crossing structures, they are underneath our roads, and particularly with there's probably the most common form of wildlife infrastructure is the culverts that go underneath the road. So you might be crossing over these structures and you have no idea. I know that that's the case with when you look at Hills-Ulkuru up road. There's over 30 wildlife crossing structures under that road. But when you're driving along, you might not actually notice that. Also, as well, the habitat. You might just think of as nice landscaping, but it is actually bespoke, specialized, habitat creation for our wildlife. So I think some of the other more visible ones would be rope bridges and rope ladders, and even those can be quite. They're not that visible, but to people, so they might actually drive under them and not even sort of be aware. So I don't. We haven't had any cases of that pushback from the community. I think there's probably more interest in what these structures are, and that's something like a key aspect of delivering our projects is communicating what we're doing on them, and particularly for the environment. So for every project, we've obviously got a web page out there defining what we do for the environment, and certainly these elements are part of that communication for each one of our projects.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so true. And some of the designs that I've seen out and about can be very clever as well and actually really naturally kind of complement the surrounding environment. So like you said, yeah, sometimes you wouldn't even know that it was there if you didn't know. We've had one more question come through from Matthew. Have the red lights been used in Australia, and how does this impact pedestrian light requirements?
I don't know a great deal. It's pretty much a novel technique at the moment, and certainly it's in Northern Europe that's where it's been really deployed and considered in mass. Look, there are some guidance have been developed by City of Melbourne in this area, and that's probably the most well developed street lighting guidance that's out there in Australia. So the guideline cross references those guidelines. They are being considered, and they are considered as probably the more so the municipal level at the moment in terms of options for lighting, and that can just either be red lighting or it can be just it doesn't need to be quite red. It could be just sort of amber and less of the blue spectrum light that some of the wildlife, not all of them, are sensitive to. So some of our wildlife are quite adapted to environments and light, so they're quite happy to hang out in well lit areas. But other fauna, are very sensitive to it, and that can affect their behaviour, but also as well, how much they're able to use that environment, but also as well wildlife crossing structures. So look, it is very new. It's certainly a new area, and I think that's going to be one of the areas that really will develop in the future.
Great, thank you. We actually have another question from Matthew. I understand Victoria has been using fenceless controls on some roads, which uses frequency or some other element to repel certain fauna. Is this correct? And can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so this is there's a number of different methods that are being trialled and looked at in terms of keeping wildlife off roads, or those animal detection systems that detect wildlife on road and will warn drivers and of their presence and hopefully influence the driver behaviour. With the deterrent systems like virtual fencing, which I think the audience member is talking about, that's under a current series. A number of trials have been undertaken with that technology, and it's something that's still being looked at, but still the evidence is being collected to determine whether it's effective or not. So a lot of these new and emerging technologies, they require trialing and testing to ensure that they're actually effective in achieving what they're aimed at for wildlife. So it's a new area in terms of what can we do in terms of new and emerging technologies to help keep our wildlife safe. And the key reason why we need some of those other types of technologies is it's not really feasible to fence our whole roadway, particularly within peri-urban environments. It becomes extremely difficult because obviously you need access to the roadway for driveways and other uses. So that's why these technologies are really important, trying to find other ways to keep our wildlife safe, and also as well keep motorists safe as well.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I actually hadn't heard of that technology before. So exciting to see how that may be applied on projects in the future. Wow. One more question. Many state jurisdiction guidance talks to acoustic impacts on fauna, and federal regulators have begun citing them in conditions, noting there is very little baseline data for fauna impacts and that typical acoustic assessment models noise to a point source sensitive receptor, i.e. bedroom or building facade. Have you had experience in any projects that have effectively applied an assessment? And if so, what type of mitigation measures were applied?
That's a great question. Really
Very good.
well-informed question. So that's a really good point. And I think the lead on from the light one is around noise mitigation. And I think both noise impacts and mitigation, it's probably out of all the sort of areas of impacts of wildlife is probably the most poorly known and assessed. So, and that's not just locally, that's internationally as well. So I was workshop last year, and that was recognised by other road authorities. That's a key area that really we don't know too much about in terms of the noise impacts of roads and on wildlife, and particularly down to particular groups or down to their species level. But we do know a bit, and even locally we know that, let's say, amphibians and frogs, they'll actually reduce their calls, and even in some cases even stop bothering to call because of the background noises too much from the surrounding environment, including roads, but also as well other noises of just the urban environment. So it does influence it does affect wildlife in certain ways, some less or more than others. And one of the key mitigations we put into place are sound walls, and we've done that on one of our projects on Mordialloc Freeway for a wetland, and that's to reduce the noise impacts. In terms of specific thresholds and so on, that is a key area that we don't really know much about. Maybe with some frogs we might know, but for a lot of other wildlife we don't really know. So that is certainly a new area to sort of look at, and certainly, things like noise studies, measuring the ambient background noise environment, post, pre and post, road development, or can potentially provide some information in terms of how it affects wildlife. But it is a really complex area to actually study, so something for future research. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much, Austin. I think those are all of the questions that we have in the Q&A. So I'll wrap us up. Thank you again so much, Austin and Helen, for your presentation today. It was so amazing to have you here to present on the fauna sensitive guidelines and some of the case studies and the impacts that it has had on our projects. Before I bring us to a close today, if you've enjoyed the session, thank you so much for attending. We do have a knowledge hub, which if you haven't got access to, please feel free to send us an email to that email address there. On there, we have a bunch of different resources, case studies, guidance materials. So feel free to jump on there if you haven't already. If you enjoy the session, you want more, we actually have some we have an innovation showcase and some more lunch and learn series coming on in June. So feel free to reach out and we can pop you on our mailing list, or follow us on LinkedIn. We post all of our events and everything that we organize on there. So it's a great way to keep involved. I will just do a very quick little spruik for some of the resources that I noted. So we have actually recently published a new recycled materials reference guide for buildings and utilities infrastructure. It's available on the Big Build website or on the ecologic knowledge hub. So urge you to jump on there. All of these resources provide a really great summary of the current Department of Transport, rail track operator and Australian standards and specs clauses that currently allow for the use of recycled materials in various different applications. So have a look at the different opportunities there that currently exist, and see what you can do going forward on your projects. Thanks again for your attendance. Thank you again, Austin and Helen, for your wonderful presentation. Hope you all enjoyed, and we will catch you later in June for more Lunch and Learn fun. Thanks so much.